people are in. You have the waiting room now.
Yep.
Okay. All right. See, Linda has joined us.
See that.
Lisa.
Louisa, hi, Louisa.
Hi, Hank.
Hi, Hank. How you doing? Good to see you.
And Susan. Nice to see you, Susan. I'm glad you could join in. Just wait a couple more minutes. Anybody else, Mike?
That's everyone in the waiting room.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, it's
I'll start.
6:30.
I'll start. I'll kick things off. Good evening, everybody. This is somewhat our regular meeting of the Aquidneck Island Climate Caucus. We have a unusually small group tonight, but that's great because we get to spend more time with all of you in a smaller group. And Terry and I organize these meetings whenever we get the energy and have the time and it's something important to communicate, basically, is when we do it. And last year at this time, we did have a discussion of bills that were introduced in the legislature. And, we want to really keep Aquidneck Island environmentalists up to date on what's going on with environmental bills. And so the way the House works is that we meet between January and June, and our deadline for introducing bills was just this past week. So a lot of the bills are in. We still have the capacity to, as individual reps, to introduce 3 more bills between now and the end of the year. And but the majority of the bills are in, probably, I venture to say, at least 1,000 of them. And so we now move into the hearing process. And so Terry and I thought that we would do an update as to what the bills are that are pending, the kinds of discussions that are taking place, and keep folks informed and have a conversation. And I want to welcome our colleague, Representative Susan Donovan, who's here. Susan represents the great town of Bristol, Rhode Island, and she also represents part of Portsmouth. And Susan is, the East Bay women are generally very strong on environmental issues, and Susan is one of our colleagues that we work very closely with. So welcome, Susan. Terry, anything you want to add?
Well, we have a couple people, some special guests that I invited that I've been working with on a couple of my bills, so a couple of advocates, and I'm waiting for Michelle. She just texted me that she's logging in. Michelle from Clean Water Action, and I've been working with her on PFAS bills, along with Representative June Speakman, who I don't think she can join us tonight. Maybe she'll pop on. And so when I see her on, I'd like to start off our conversation this evening by kicking it over to her to talk a little bit about the PFAS bills that we put in. But while we're waiting, I welcome you all as well. And there she is right now. So I'm probably going to put her on the spot because she's just logging in.
Well, before she does that, what we thought we'd do is we've broken the bills into several different categories tonight. So we have bills on climate, we have bills on the CRMC, we have bills on solar siting, zero emissions, plastic reduction, pesticides. So we've broken the bills into different categories that we can discuss in some detail, or we can get back to you. I see our colleague, Michelle McGaw has joined us.
Good. And we have
Great town.
transportation.
On transportation, yep.
And greenhouse gas emissions. too.
Correct. So because Michelle Bodwin, who I don't see here anywhere, is she here?
She's here. I see her.
Hi, Michelle. Because of her time limitations, we're going to start with her. And Michelle is going to update us on PFAS bills, which are chemicals in water and packaging. And she's going to go, and Terry has been a sponsor of those bills. And so, Michelle, you're up.
Hey, can everybody hear me okay?
It's great.
Okay. And Terry, is there anything that you really want me to highlight?
I just thought it'd be great to have you give an overview of we have 4 PFAS bills in right now, maybe 4 that have been introduced. our comprehensive bill and our food packaging bill and the PFAS in water and PFAS in ground soil. So if you just wanted to give a quick overview, and if people have questions, it'd be great to have you here to help answer them.
Sure, sure. And I just want to make sure that should I cover a little bit of background on PFAS?
Sure.
Is that helpful? Okay,
Just a little bit, like, explain to people what PFAS is and why we're so concerned about it, please.
sure, sure. Okay, great. Yeah, so PFAS is also known as the Teflon chemical. It's the miracle chemical that can make pans nonstick. It can make our outdoor gear waterproof. It has a lot of properties that are have been very valuable, grease proofing, waterproofing, etc. So it's been used in many, many, many products. I just named a few of them to add a few more to the list: carpets, textiles, rugs. Anytime you see stain resistant on a textile, pretty likely that's PFAS. So it is a class of chemicals, and they all have, or most of them, I guess, have those qualities, but they don't break down. And so what makes them so useful on products also can make them very harmful to our health. So they build up in our bodies. Almost, I would say, I've seen studies between 90 and 99% of people tested have PFAS in their blood. It's absolutely ubiquitous. It's in waterways across the country, including our own in Rhode Island. And the health problems that it can cause are kind of all over the map: high cholesterol, early menopause, can cause some cancers, low birth weights. It can be considered an endocrine disruptor. So it has a lot of just general birth defects. It has a lot of health effects. So Rep. Cortbrand has been sponsoring these bills. We've been working them for quite a few years, particularly the packaging bill, to get it out of food packaging. So it's the other thing that I want to say is that there are a lot of alternatives for PFAS. So while it has all these qualities, there are also a lot of alternatives for it. So the bills that we're working on this year are the food packaging bill, which is shifted a little bit this year from years past. It actually now includes heavy metals, which is great, and it covers more packaging, more than just food packaging. So that's kind of a narrowly focused bill, but we think it'll make a big impact, particularly because almost all the states in New England have already passed this legislation. So we really don't want Rhode Island to be behind on that one. So
Sure,
then
let me ask you a question about that. So if other
Sure.
states in New England have passed it and producers of products with PFAS in them have to begin making adaptations, how does that work in terms of their sort of policy for manufacture of these products? Are they going to be reducing the PFAS in them? So we'll get that anyway, or how might that work?
So there are a number of big companies, for example, McDonald's, who have agreed to get rid of PFAS by sometime before 2030. I can't remember what the year is. Whenever they do it voluntarily, they give themselves the absolute longest amount of time that they possibly can in order to do it. So it is great that these companies, let's see, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, McDonald's, Burger King has not done it. Chipotle, Sweet Greens, there's a growing list of companies that have agreed to do it voluntarily and are some can say we have already done it. So there, there is a movement in that way, absolutely. And then some of these other states have, helped push them along. The dates for implementation are still within the next, I think 2 to 3 years. So Rhode Island, my fear is that if Rhode Island doesn't pass the bill, all the packaging that's left over that still has PFAS will be distributed in Rhode Island.
Or dumped in Rhode Island.
Yeah, exactly. Until they, finally switch over their whole inventory. So, I don't want us to be the last folks to have this change made. So that's definitely something that I've been thinking about. And New Hampshire is the other state that has not passed a food packaging law yet, but
And Maine has the very expansive bill. I think they have the most expansive bill in New England that they did pass.
yes, yeah, and that's and so we modeled our the other products bill off of that bill. So it's actually it kind of covers PFAS in stages. The end goal is that by 2030, PFAS will only be used for necessary uses in Rhode Island if that bill gets passed. In the meantime, beginning the first year after it gets passed, any manufacturer that uses PFAS in products will have to disclose that they have PFAS in their products, regardless of what the product is. And then within a year after that, it will be banned in carpeting and other textiles,
Cosmetics.
juvenile products, cookware, outdoor apparel.
Foam, our firefighting foam. We haven't talked about that yet.
Yep, firefighting foam as well. Yeah, so it'll be banned in those products. And then within the next, whatever, 8 years after that, you will have to actually have an exemption to have it in any product. So it is a very expansive bill, and it would be great if we could pass it. So I think it would do a lot. And the way I think about these 4 bills, so we'll talk about the water bills, is kind of upstream and downstream, right? So we have to stop PFAS at the source. Otherwise, what we're really fighting a never-ending battle at the other end, at the tap, so to speak. So we do want to cover downstream as well, since we know we have PFAS in our water. So we want to set some drinking water standards. That's what one of the bills will do, as well as start remediation efforts. And that bill will cover ground, surface, and drinking water. And then there's a 4th bill that will add PFAS to the hazardous substance list in the state, which will allow DEM to do more remediation of soils, for example. So that one's like a very, very short bill, but also important and helps DEM do their job.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. That's good information.
And I
Terry and I both sit on the Environment Committee in the House, and we just had the hearing on the PFAS bills just last week. And it was pretty moving, particularly the firefighters' testimony about the impact it's having on firefighters. So thank you,
And
Michelle.
for the Aquidneck Islanders too, we had the state firefighters lobbyist, and I believe he testified that there's only 6 communities that still have PFAS in their firefighting foam. Everybody else has moved to a replacement product that is PFAS free. And I believe all the firefighting departments on Aquidneck Island had made that move. I don't think we were one of the, I think he said 6 departments still had some firefighting foam in their, on their property. So
Great. Great, thanks, Michelle. That's really helpful. Any questions for Michelle? So we have a lot to talk about tonight. I don't want to cut you off, Michelle, but there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. I'm good.
So I know you're busy. If you want to cut out, that's fine. That's fine with us. Thank you, Michelle. Have a wonderful.
Thank you, Michelle, for joining
Thank you.
us. We
Great.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank
Have a
you
good
guys.
night.
Thank you for your interest.
So we wanted to move
Your
on to
work.
climate. I saw that Janine was here, but she seems to have left. Is
No,
Janine?
she's here. I see her.
Oh, super. Okay. So climate, there's a lot going on climate. You know, we passed the Act on Climate last year, and I'm sort of characterizing this year, although Terry's bill on literacy, which Janine will talk about, has been around a few years, but there's been a lot of emphasis around how to move on climate because we've really made a statement with the passage of the Act on Climate. And one of the things that Terry's been working on is climate literacy curriculum. And so we can introduce Janine Silversmith from the Environmental Educators Association. Janine, why don't you tell us about that bill, and then we'll move on to the other climate bills.
Yes, thank you, Rep. Carson and Rep. Cortrian for having me. Hello, everyone. So this bill, we're really excited about this bill. Like Rep. Carson said, I'm Janine Silversmith. I'm with the Rhode Island Environmental Education Association, otherwise known as RIA. And we know that education is often the piece of the puzzle that is left out when we're talking about climate change and how to mitigate the effects and come up with solutions. And so we're very happy that Rep. Cortrian introduced this bill and that the sponsors that are on it, and Rep. Carson has been so instrumental in climate change as well. So this bill basically the first step would be to bring together members of the environmental education and climate change education community, so the non-formal educators, with formal educators, principals and administrators and classroom teachers, to develop a set of key environmental principles and concepts. And this is so that after that is done, those principles and concepts can be basically compared to the already existing standards in science and civics and social studies specifically. And then the principles of climate change and the environment and sustainability can be integrated into the standards. So it's not about changing the standards or changing the curricula that districts have either already chosen or in the process of choosing. It's about creating the resources, the activities, the materials that teachers look for when they go to teach to the standards, and are looking for those resources to do a good job. And so in science, especially, we always talk about having natural phenomenon to focus on when we're teaching, any concept. And they're called like anchor phenomenon if they're something that you're focused on to teach lots of different concepts around a topic. So if we create the resources for teachers to be able to use climate change and the environment as that anchor phenomenon or phenomena, plural phenomenons, I don't know, then we're basically helping teachers get what they tell us that they want and need. Like what we did a survey just a couple of years ago, like a year before COVID struck, and overwhelmingly teachers want to teach about climate change and the environment. It's not that they don't know how to fit it into their standards, it's that they're not sure what activities to use or what resources or what community partners to ask into their classroom or to go on field trips with. So that is a big part of it. It also makes available resources for other subjects, math and English language arts, so that teachers teaching those concepts or elementary school teachers can also use climate change and the environment as anchor phenomenon. And it establishes basically a statewide green award to recognize the schools and the teachers that are doing a great job at climate change education. And it also, want to make sure I'm hitting all my points here. the last thing is professional development for teachers, that anytime RIDE is offering professional development for teachers in science or social studies and civics, that these key principles and concepts that were developed are included in that PD. So that's a
great job. You did
That's great. That's great.
Thank you.
Great.
And if
Thank you.
it's okay, can I drop a couple of links? I know that you dropped the bill
Absolutely.
already,
Yeah.
Rep. Corfrian. There's also a great page that we have on RIA about, with an info sheet, and if you want to join our email campaign that was set up by the Save the Bay folks, and obviously your
Has that
reps
bill
are
been
here.
heard yet, Terry? Has that bill been heard yet?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes, and when we were in person at the committee hearing, we got a good response. NEA was supportive. Quite a few people spoke favorably, and even RIDE seemed to be favorable, but they also told us offline that they wanted to talk to us about it. And now we're at the more challenging of trying to get a meeting set up to do that follow-up. So so I'm hopeful, since the commissioner was the keynote speaker at RIA's annual meeting, that that is a good sign for us this year.
That's great. Are there any questions for Janine before we move on to some other topics?
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you, Janine. I know that you
joining
may need to run, so feel free to go if you need to run.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you.
nursing a daughter who's sick. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care of
Take
yourself.
care.
So before we go back to climate, I'm just going to run down a list of the plastic bills. So, and again, Terry and I sit on environment. So we've been hearing all these bills. If you want to discuss these, because I know this is a really hot topic for Aquidneck Island. We brought back banning plastic bags. We brought back banning nips, the little bottles that we see all over the place. We've started to have a discussion about producer responsibility, which means that the folks that create the packaging take some responsibility back for the management of the waste at the end of the stream. We've looked at styrofoam. Banning styrofoam again is up for grabs because that lives in the landfill for 1,000 years. We're looking at, there's a bill in that I just co-sponsored this week that would prohibit the state from buying plastics. And I don't know where we'll go with that, but the state uses a lot of plastics in purchasing, wherever they can cut back on the purchasing of plastic that creates more waste. I personally have a bill in that would require a waste audit of the State House because we generate a little bit too much plastic waste at the State House. And a lot of us, as you can see, they're nodding their heads. We're concerned about that. And we want to set an example for the rest of the state. So, and the interesting thing about plastics is that there was really a lot of pushback in the Environment Committee meeting 3 and 4 weeks ago because there's a very strong environmental contingency on the Environment Committee this year. And we really want to do something about the bottles and the nips and the bags. I don't know what will happen, but there's a very strong sentiment there that this has to come to some kind of a conclusion. So I don't know if anybody has any questions on those topics, because I know they're big issues on the beaches here and big issues in Aquidneck Island. Louisa.
Yeah, I take 3 of my newspaper bags pretty much every day and I fill them up. Just nip bottles around. I just go different. It's amazing. I mean, what is the feedback?
Well, at the hearing, the feedback was we got pushback from the liquor store owners. Astoundingly, we heard from some liquor store owners that nips are as much as 30 or 40% of their sales, which I found that to be shocking. That wasn't on the island. The liquor store owner that testified from the island said that wasn't his experience, but we heard some from the urban areas that's how they described it. So that was pretty shocking. And so there was at the meeting, this is what I've observed this year, is that at the meeting, everybody's always willing to negotiate and meet again. And then after the meeting, setting up those meetings with those people becomes they scatter, and it's really hard to find them to have those conversations.
I actually have an update on that, Terry. As I said, that meeting was particularly conspicuous that the committee was really fed up with the
Pushing.
plastic bottles. I mean, there was real uniform pushback on it. Now, I spoke to one of the lobbyists for the liquor industry on Thursday, and I asked him where this meeting was. Like, they said they were willing to come to the table and negotiate around these NIPs. And he told me that there's a solution being floated around amongst the liquor stores to put more garbage cans, basically, or recycling bins around the stores themselves. And they were working on it. So
We heard a little bit about that at the,
yes,
but that doesn't really get rid of the garbage.
no, it doesn't.
So they didn't really want to address that piece that we were trying to say, but look what it's doing to the landfill, look what it's doing, because the NIPS in particular, even if we had, they're not recyclable with the equipment we have now. We would have to have a bottle bill and with a program that took those NIPS out of the stream and put them all together and sent them for special recycling. But the equipment that we have at the landfill, the little bottles, they
All between the cracks, I bet.
they
Yeah.
fall right, and they wreak havoc, and they're not, they get passed, so they don't get recycled.
I was actually in a liquor store about maybe, I don't know, a week or two ago here in Newport, and behind the register was all these NIPS, right? So I asked the gentleman that worked there, I said, how much of this is your business? You know, I didn't identify myself initially. I just asked him, and he said to me, oh, a lot of people are talking about these NIPS. And I was like, really? You know, and then I introduced myself. I told him what my job was, and I told him that there's a big push. And he said that he thought that we'd also have to ban the next size bottle up, because he thinks that people are then going to go to the next size bottle, you know, and I don't know what the solution is to this. We last year, we had a bill that would have put like a bottle bill return fee on the bottles, and the liquor industry didn't like that. And then this year, the chair of the committee, David Bennett from Warwick, banned them, and they didn't like that. So I can't tell you that it was a very heated discussion. Very heated discussion, more than I had ever seen, actually. There was real pushback from the committee members. And then we're still trying to ban plastic bags, you know, like something like 19 or 20 communities in Rhode Island have done it. And the sponsor is very frustrated that we can't get a statewide ban. So that's out there also. So plastics remain a very big issue here. And hopefully this year we can make some progress on some
Yeah.
plastic issues.
Really, the idea that we are relying on volunteers, probably many of you have been to a beach cleanup, and the idea that that is our solution for cleaning up plastic waste that escapes the trip to the landfill is by relying on volunteers. That's just unacceptable in my mind.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
So
my
In my mind, those
question too
small
is-
bottles, I was going to say, are also a substance abuse issue.
Yes, it
You know,
is.
I think that's a big part of the discussion around those nip bottles, and the fact that it's so easy for people to go in, pick up a small bottle, drink it
Right.
on the way home, throw it out the window, and nobody's the wiser. And I know when I have done cleanups, I was in Common Fence Point one time doing a cleanup, and on one road I picked up close to 200 nips, and they were all exactly the same bottle. So
Wow.
it's obviously, you know, a substance abuse issue that somebody is just, you know.
Now, and funny that you bring that up, because one of the pieces of testimony that we heard was that in favor of keeping NIPS is that small size allows people with that might have drinking issues to keep their habit in check, because they just have that one small little nip as
They
opposed to
said.
going home with a whole bottle. And so we did hear that kind of, it's touching on what you're saying. We did have one colleague, Rep. Speakman, that really wanted us to keep to not dive into the psychological issues around drinking as opposed to the environmental harm caused by the bottles themselves.
Yeah, we heard, you're absolutely right, Michelle. Of course, we heard it in the Environment Committee, and so we were just discussing the environmental side.
Mhm.
But you're absolutely right about that. Did you have a comment, Louisa?
Well, I was gonna say, do you want us to just send you pictures of filled plastic bags?
We had them, we had
You
them,
have
had
bags?
bags, we had volunteers come and show us big containers full and they picked up 2,000 of them on a day, you know,
If-
it's
so you've seen that.
overwhelming,
If they
overwhelming.
want
Question
to
I
do-
have is, every now and again, I find a glass nip. Like, which is better? There's very few of them, very few of them.
We aren't recycling glass in Rhode Island, so
We're using it as cover in the landfill.
where we crush it up and then we spread it out.
Hmm, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm not really, I don't have a scientific opinion to offer you, Louisa.
I was just curious if glass would be better from yours, but it sounds like no. So
It's, I guess.
Probably a little bit better.
Yeah, because it's not made with petroleum, because the
Right,
whole thing with the
right.
plastics is we're also fueling our, our addiction to petroleum.
plus, they're all going down into the drains and going out into the ocean, I would think. I
Right.
don't know
It's
what they're
awful.
doing down below.
It's awful.
At least a glass bottle would eventually degrade.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So that's an update on the plastics. I don't know if anybody has any questions about anything else. I think part of the frustration is that for the Environment Committee, they've been hearing these bills for years and we're not making much progress on them. And I don't really know where we're going to go this year, but there is a very strong voice there this year for some change on plastics. So
Hey, Terry, somebody had a question in the chat about recycling glass.
Oh, that's.
What you
oh,
you touched
Lynn.
on it for a second?
Yeah, it says no, we do not recycle glass in Rhode Island. We, as was stated, we crush it and they use it at the landfill as a cover in between layers, I suppose. But they don't recycle it for whatever reason.
no market, there's no market for it. There's
Yeah.
no market for it.
And
That's been the
we-
problem.
Right. If we had if we had a bottle bill, perhaps there would be some kind of other producer responsibility. Those, when you have the fee on the bottle, then it goes back to the manufacturer, I believe, right? Isn't that how that works? When somebody pays the nickel for the bottle and then they get their nickel back, do those bottles make their way? I'm hoping that we can hear from somebody when we have the hearing for the bottle bill.
Yeah, we haven't heard that hearing yet on the
Yeah,
bottom.
that we will hear from somebody that's in the industry of taking care of this waste. Because in Vermont, I know there's machines, there's companies that do this. And I'm assuming they do it for plastic and glass, but that's a question for an expert.
So someone asked it separated and bring it to the transfer station. Yeah, I hear you on that. I mean, every day, my understanding at the landfill, which is a couple years old, but I believe it still holds, is that they put the waste in on a daily basis and then they cover it with crushed glass. So somehow they must be able to extract the glass out of the system that they have, because the recycling all goes, and it's open, you can go see it, it's open to the public. The recycling goes through this big super machine that sorts things out, and the glass may go in a certain area, and then they take that and they crush it, and that's where they put it. So anyway, we have climate to talk about and pesticides. Climate is a big issue. I'm going to say a few things and then turn it over to Terry and to Michelle, and Susan may want to talk about her jobs bill. As I said, passage of the Act on Climate has really triggered a huge response. And when we think about curtailing emissions, we have a couple big areas. We have transportation, we have buildings, and we have electrification. And those are the three sort of targeted areas that folks are talking about in terms of reducing carbon. And so what I've been focused on as the House sponsor of Act on Climate is really enforcing it and looking at the bill. I tell everybody all the time, I carry the bill in my pocketbook. That way we can pull it up and talk about it. I have it pretty memorized in a cut and paste mode. And so one of the aspects of the bill has been to engage the environmental justice community as we go forward the next 28 years to get to zero emissions. And the bill that I have put on is to mandate the creation of an environmental justice council that would be embedded in the law that would really bring people of color and environmental justice communities into the conversation about climate. So that's the bill that I have in. But I'm going to turn this over to Terry to talk about her bill on transportation, and then maybe we can hear from Michelle and Susan as well, Terry. So it's all yours.
Yes, I just put in, it just popped up this past late last week, a transportation bill. Since the TCI bill, the 3 states that were together, we had that agreement amongst Connecticut and Massachusetts to participate in TCI, which would have been a regional approach. But when gas prices started to creep up, and it's an election year, and the Connecticut legislature got squeamish, and the governor there backed out, and then the Massachusetts Governor Baker, I think he was annoyed, he backed out, and that left Rhode Island standing at the altar with no partners to move forward with. So Governor McKee also walked away from the TCI bill, and they had spent a decade working on this. So I have put in a bill that to try to get to some of the same goals. TCI had developed a revenue stream, which this bill does not really do that. But it does set some targets, because we still need to meet the Act on Climate goals. So it sets targets on when we want to see new vehicles be transferred over to electric. And it sets up it also sets up a board, much like Lauren just described, a environmental justice board, just to work on that. And I think we'll hear that there's a few bills that have that component embedded into it. So I think Lauren's bill, you had some ideas about how to bring all these under one roof, which makes a lot of sense. And I'm trying to think what else. The transportation bill has Rhode Island adopting the California emission standards. So that would push us to in the direction of more electrification for cars. And it talks about the utility developing a plan and keeping us talking about how the grid needs to be updated. So it's a long-term plan to get the transportation sector clean and electrified. And it has a number of steps.
Yeah, not only that, but we didn't really have the infrastructure bill on our agenda, Terry. And that's a whole nother discussion about all the money coming to Rhode Island.
Right.
There is $23 million coming to Rhode Island to create EV charging systems around the state. And right now, the Office of Energy Resources is drafting the plan. They're waiting. They've gotten some federal direction as to how we can spend this money. But I think that we can see that, I would guess by September, there will be some kind of a proposal finalized about, I think they have to put the the EV charging stations so many miles from interstate highways. And because Rhode Island is so small, most of the state really fits that criteria. So I think that around September, the plan will be finalized and approved by the federal government. And we're going to see this large investment of $23 million in charging stations around the state.
Michelle, do you have a bill on pertaining to that, right?
Turning to that, yeah. And so the infrastructure money for EV charging, it's a 50-mile perimeter around the major core arteries. And so, yeah, so it basically takes into account all of the state of Rhode Island, which is, certainly makes things a little bit easier for us. The proposal for that has to be into the federal government by August 1st. So OER is looking to have something completed, by the summer, take some public input on that, and then get it in probably by the end of July, so that we'll have information back on that, as Lauren said, probably around September sometime. So I do have transportation is something I've been looking at as well, paying a lot of attention to. For me, it's been around electric vehicles. And while I certainly agree that public transit is certainly the key way to go, if we can encourage more public transit, that's optimal for Rhode Island. But for the areas that I represent, thinking about it practically, electric vehicles is certainly something that we're going to need to look at from our community. So I've been really focused on trying to make sure that the EV infrastructure is there across the state so that we can encourage people to shift away from their fossil fuel vehicles. So I have an EV bill in there now that would require any new construction parking lots would require EV infrastructure, EV charging infrastructure to be incorporated as part of the plan. We did have a hearing in the House. I'm still waiting for it to be heard in the Senate. We'll see what ends up happening with that. The big pushback on that is always the money and whether or not that's an unfunded mandate. So there is still some question about whether or not we will be able to use some of the money, that $23 million that we're getting as part of the infrastructure money to help pay for some of that charging infrastructure, because we really need it, we need it on our corridors, our highways, but we're also going to need it in our cities and our towns where people are living. We're going to need it where apartment buildings are, so that people can charge when they are, at home. So we're going to need to expand that in a lot of different ways. So we're looking right now at trying to figure out, I have a regular conversation with OER to figure out how we're going to be able to use that money to pay for that, so that maybe some of that $23 million we'll be able to use for some of that EV charging infrastructure. There's also another $2.5 billion in federal grants that are going to be available. More information to come from the federal government. We don't have a lot of guidance on how that can be used, but there's going to be a lot of grant money available. So I've been working a lot with OER about EV charging infrastructure to see what it's going to look like along our corridors and how we can incorporate that into housing developments, shopping centers, into making sure our universities have the charging. So having a lot of conversations around that. Also I was going to submit a bill this year asking to bring back incentives for electric vehicle purchases. Rhode Island is the only state in the Northeast that does not have an incentive for EV purchases. But it looks like that's going to happen without legislation. I've been having, as I said, I'm having a lot of conversations regularly. And so OER is, I think they're working on hopefully trying to bring that back. We shall see, but I'm optimistic that they're going to try to do something. If not, I told them I would work on it and we'll bring legislation forward. But if we can do it without legislation, obviously that's fantastic.
Michelle, there's a question in the chat that do you envision the chargers at these are to be fast chargers? Is that something specific?
I think there's going to be some level 2 and some level 3, and it's going to depend on where the chargers are. We're trying to get a mix of them. Certain level 3 chargers are a lot more expensive to install. So I think we're going to see some kind of a range of that. If they are, let's say it's an apartment dwelling, someplace where somebody's going to be able to park their car overnight to charge, it's certainly much more cost effective for it to be a level 2 charger. If it is someplace along the highways, I expect that we will probably see more investment in the level 3 charging. Or at least that's the goal that we're looking for, because it takes a long time with a level 2 charger to charge up a vehicle, and we want to make it convenient and easy for people to make that transition. So I think we're going to see a mix is, I guess, the answer. That that's what it looks like right now, is that we're going to see a mix of that.
Louisa, I know this is close to your heart.
Well, my sister just bought an EV car, and so I just want to say, she's come here to visit and goes to slow charge places out at Gurney's and some of the hotels, but you got to be there for 8 hours to get a charge. So the difference between them is that if even in an apartment, one can charge all night, but that means only one person can really use it. So you got to look at that for the long term. If you're going to have multiple people, they're either an hour or they're 6 to 8 hours to charge. That's a huge difference. And so the long-term viability seems if you're gonna really go that way. So it's just a comment on EV charging. I'll get to my.
Yeah, and you know what,
other
Louisa, I think there's going to be public opportunity for public comment on the plan, so I'll make sure that I know this is something that you really care
Okay.
about. I'll
Well,
keep you in the loop on that, because there will
Yeah.
be an opportunity for public comment on this plan.
Michelle,
And
what's
Louisa, if
the-
you want to connect on that anytime, I'm also an EV, I'm an EV
Uh-huh.
owner myself.
Okay, yeah,
And so I'm certainly well-versed in how challenging it can be if you're somewhere and you run out of
yeah,
juice for your
yeah.
car.
Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying, and that's one of the reasons that that I'm really pushing for this. And I agree. If we can get level 3 chargers everywhere, that would be ideal. It, as I
Right.
said, it is
Yeah.
a lot more costly
Right.
to do that. The other thing is that not all vehicles are equipped to handle a DC fast charge. And so we need to make sure that we have different options.
Mhm.
There are charging stations that provide you with options where you can do a level 2 or a level 3, depending on what type of vehicle you have and what kind of charging you have accessible to you. So, you know, we may be looking at some of that. The state we haven't obviously decided what type of charging infrastructure we're going to utilize. We're probably going to end up, what I'm reading is that a lot of the states are looking at contracting with charging companies. And so I imagine that will be part of the contract, the RFP when it goes out, if we end up going with a company to do that, to figure out what our needs are. So the first set is the first goal is to figure out what our needs are, so that then we can submit that plan to the federal government for approval.
Thank you. Thank you. That's good information. Anything else on transportation? Or we covered the big
No,
topic?
I put the transportation bill in to the chat if anybody wants to take a look. What's your bill number, Michelle? I'll grab it and put it in the.
I'll post a link to it. I gotta look it up.
Okay.
So the second place that we need to reduce emissions is buildings, right? So Michelle, you have some ideas on that. Did you put your bill in around no gas hookups? Did you ever put that bill in?
Or your sighting bill? We could talk.
Or even your
about-
siting bill too. We could talk about that, energy siting.
The energy siting bill, actually, you're gonna hear that in the Environment Committee on Thursday. So
Mhm.
the energy siting bill is a bill that basically takes the obligations of the Act on Climate and provides a level of enforcement through the Energy Facility Siting Board. So any applications for new energy facility sightings would be required to include information about how the new facility would impact our obligations for carbon reduction. Would be required to be included as part of the application, and then the Energy Facility Siting Board would be required to take that into consideration. So really, it's just taking what is included in the Act on Climate and sort of clarifying that it isn't, for the Energy Facility Siting Board. It makes it a little bit easier for them because they'll have all the information directly in the application, but it also provides some clarification that it absolutely has to be incorporated into that. And so that is going to be heard on Thursday. So we shall see what happens. I introduced it last year before the Act on Climate was passed. And then after it got passed, it just seemed like it should be a no-brainer that we have to incorporate that into the decision-making process. It sounds like they are and they will be, but really I would just like to make sure that we have that clarity around it to make sure that there is no question for future facility siting applications.
I believe that they did, and when they had the docket hearing for Aquidneck Island for Old Mill, they did bring up the Act on Climate. I know that was brought up by the interveners and by,
And they're also taking it into consideration now, the C3 power, the C3 project that's going on in Providence, they're taking it into account with that as well. So again, and I'm cautiously optimistic. I think it's a no-brainer. I feel like it's such an easy thing to say, yes, we need to include this information in the application. But we shall, it's a matter of just getting the language exactly the way, the way it's going to work for everybody. So I'm still working through on the back end to figure out exactly what that language should look like.
Right. And Michelle, I
that-
owe you a call on that. I saw your email on that. You
Yep.
know, as you can hear, there's a lot of things spilling out of the Act on Climate. And one of the things is how to get the different departments at the state level and the commissions and the councils to begin codifying the requirements and the mandates for carbon reduction into their day-to-day work. That's sort of the challenge this year, which is why we've got a plethora of bills.
I put in another bill on heating in natural gas. Somebody suggested that we should look at what Massachusetts had put in. There was a big bill put in Massachusetts. And I just I put out some questions to our ledge council. And before I knew it, they were drafting a bill for me that was very all-encompassing. And I pared it down a little bit because it seemed a little too big to present all at once. But in the process of talking to the staffers at the PUC, I learned that we don't really have a plan. We have a plan for increased efficiency around natural gas, but we don't really have a plan of actually moving away from it and an alternative at this point. So this bill requires that a plan be developed, and then it sets up some funding streams for homeowners and for the utility through a trust fund and through a bond process through the infrastructure bank. So that bill hasn't been heard yet. I didn't really have an advocate working with me on it. The Green Energy Consumers helped me after the fact a bit. So we'll see where it goes. But like Lauren was saying, there's all these different sectors, and we're just trying to put ideas out there. And I think it's going to take us a couple of years probably to hone in on what all the right solutions are.
Yeah, and not only that, but I'm sure you all read in the paper that one of the challenges that Peter Nerona made to the grid sale to PPL was around their lack of commitment to compliance with the Act on Climate. That was one of the problems with which is why he put he stopped that in the short term for that sale. So it's spilling over into other areas. Now, another area is around construction and jobs and what we build. Susan, do you want to make some comments on your bill? Because we have to start building, we have to start training people to build the kinds of buildings that get us to our emission standards, right?
Sure. So I have a bill in that creates a Governor's Clean Energy Workforce Transition Commission. And the primary purpose is to create a strategic plan for transitioning workers displaced by the changeover from fossil fuels to the green economy. And so they would address job training. So we worked on this legislation with the labor organizations and the environmental community. And it's one of labor's priorities this session. I had an interesting conversation last week with somebody from the South County Chamber of Commerce who wants to establish, or she's working on a program with the wind farm industry to train technicians in the industry. They don't have technicians, enough of them in the state to work on the wind turbines. So hopefully this commission will pass and they can start overseeing this work. So that's that bill.
That's great. So as you can see, we have buildings, we have transportation, we have enforcement of the Act on Climate, we have transportation. There's a variety of spinoffs, and there are even other bills that we haven't gotten into today that deal with enforcement. And my opinion is that we're going to hear them all this year, and some are going to pass, and we're going to narrowly begin focusing on a more specific strategy to get to that. Any questions on climate or climate issues? Because we're hitting an hour. I don't know how much more time people have, maybe another 15 minutes. I wanted to hit on pesticide bills. And also there was someone that had a question about the Coastal Resource Management Council Study Commission. Is anyone on this call have that question? Terry thought something. Was it you, Hank? Well, hold on one second. Let me do pesticides and then we'll do that. I've been a big advocate for pesticide safety for many years, and we haven't really done much in the State House since I've been there. And we have two bills, one that we heard in Environment a few weeks ago around Terry, what is it? Could you explain what Rebecca's bill is? It's banning of some nicotinoids? Is that what it is?
Yeah, nicotinoids. Yeah, I was gonna say neonics. but
Neonics, yeah, neonics,
Right.
yeah.
And yeah, it's another toxic substance that has been banned elsewhere. And I'm not sure which, I think you can buy it. It's in pesticides that you can buy at the Agway, for instance, and then applicators. I think her bill would require that you only licensed applicators could use it, right? Because so if a farm needed it, they would have to hire, or they would have to get trained themselves. And I think in the testimony, we heard some people were licensed and some people there were a couple of different levels, which I didn't really, I think we heard about licensed and maybe trained, or there was another term. And so people would have to go up, people that were using the product would have to have the highest amount of training that we offer. It
Yes.
was my understanding.
Yeah, there's licensing and certification. It really
That's it,
requires increased
certification. That was
certification.
the word I was
Requires increased
searching for.
certification. And so what my concern has been for several years, and I've never put a bill in before, was that homeowners are far from certified and they can buy these products at, Home Depot. And so my concern has been that, consumers don't really know how seriously toxic these chemicals are. So I have a bill being heard Thursday rather, which would require some notification in stores that explains to consumers that these are toxic materials and they need to safely manage them and take care of them. So it's kind of like a right to know bill as you purchase the product.
We did something similar to that for opioids at the drugstore counter, if I recall, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think we did.
So it seems to be pretty common sense.
Yeah, I've never put this bill in before. I had drafted it 2 years ago and COVID got in the way and I never submitted it. And so I decided to put it in again and really keep this conversation going. So it's not like one of my top bills, but I think it is something that we should really begin talking about to notify consumers that they're using very hazardous materials on our lawns, basically, and our neighboring lawns. So there was a question to see, Deborah Giro, our colleague out of Jamestown, has been chairing a House study commission on the Coastal Resource Management Council. Study commissions generally meet for about 6 or 9 months with a specific targeted set of people who participate, who have expertise in the subject, and then put forth a series of ideas about how to improve specific systems. So Deb has put forth this study commission on the CRMC. I sit on that study commission with her. We have met since about September. We generally meet once a month. So we've met like maybe 5 or 6 times. We're beginning to get closer to our recommendations. In fact, Deb and I are thinking about having a community meeting on that. I spoke to her today, and it would be a similar Zoom meeting where we would invite people that really care about the CRMC. What I've said is that in my district, there's a small amount of people that care about it, but the people that care about it know a real lot about it, like Hank Nickskern. They know exactly what they're about. So whatever, how can I help you, Hank? What questions do you have on the work of the study commission?
I just wondered how it was going. That's
Well, I think we're moving to a place where we're going to begin discussing specific recommendations, and then that goes into bill form. So I think that's what the chairwoman has in mind. There's been a lot of discussion, particularly around the composition of the council. There's been a lot of discussion about the terms of office. They serve for a long time. They serve for long periods of time. There's been some concern about some conflict of interest among some of the council members as decisions have been made over the past 4 or 5 years. There's some concern about the lack of the budget of the CRMC, because the CRMC was created in statute in the 70s. And clearly the work along the coast has grown dramatically, particularly with the increased work that they need to do around offshore wind, which is really, and sea rise, which are huge issues. So there's concerns about the budget, and there's concern about really providing them with more independent legal counsel. I think that what the way they operate is that they have lawyers on contract. And so they bring the lawyers in as necessary as they address different issues relative to the shore. And there's an interest on the commission to see them have increased legal resources to the commission. And I think, like I said, where we're at is we're going to probably, I would say our next meeting will be in March. I don't have the date yet. And I would think that Chairwoman Ruggiero is working on a specific list of recommendations. And then my agenda with her would be to really pull together a list of people from Aquidneck Island and Jamestown, waterfront commissions, boaters, sailors, folks that are really concerned about this, the marine industry, and really get your input as to where we're going. So that's what Deb and I are hoping to do sometime in the next month. That's where we're at.
That'd be great.
Terry, why don't you tell us about your Beach Access Study Commission?
We're getting really close. We had a meeting last week and narrowed down the pieces of a bill 10 feet above the most recent high tide line, as evidenced by, and we have a very detailed description of what that would look like. Some people brought a photo in and said, gee, the high tide looks like it here, but here's where the rack line is, which is where the debris is. So we want to use the visual line. And then 10 feet above that is what the commission members came to consensus around. And that's based on everything from two couples passing each other to the width of an ox cart, because initially when seaweed collection was happening historically, it happened by ox carts. And this 10 feet, I found something from Sturbridge, Old Sturbridge Village last week, and it says an ox cart is 7.9 feet across. So 10 feet seems reasonable, even though we're not really collecting seaweed by ox cart anymore. So that's what's going to be put forward into a bill. We have retired Judge Flaherty, Francis Flaherty, sitting on the commission, and I've asked him to write the findings. I had some findings for the commission members to look at based on all the information we've heard in the study commission, and we've heard from historians and from coastal scientists and from saltwater anglers and from DEM and from CRMC. So we've gotten a lot of testimony. We heard from one of our commission members was actually present in 1986 at the Constitutional Convention, where this portion of our Constitution was enhanced, and it was widely supported by voters. So we have a court case. For those that don't know, we have a court case from 1982, and we have a constitutional amendment from 1986, and the two of them are in conflict. And so this study commission has been looking at how to address that so that the public can exercise their privileges of the shore as articulated in the Constitution, and where they can do that. And so that's been, it's been super interesting.
A lot of content, a lot of content.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of content.
So,
Terry's doing great work on that. One last topic, and then we will go. Louisa, and renewable, what did you want to ask on that? We didn't touch on that.
Yeah, I guess I know that for Rhode Island, we're banking on wind power a lot, but it seems to me we need to do built structures. That's where we use our energy. And so it's like putting solar on. And I'm just curious what the plan is for that, for, you know, both government buildings and commercial buildings and residential.
I'd say there's a lot of conversation of how to encourage people to put it on their buildings, because that's not where they want to put it. They want to cut down farmland, forest land, because that is the cheapest, easiest way to do it. And there's a lot of concern about that. And June Speakman has a bill on that I think I'm a co-sponsor on, and several of us were talking with there's some advocates that are definitely working on that around solar, but it's hard. It is a problem. And then we have the wind turbines, and I think there's some movement around battery storage, large batteries. I think there might be a bill in for that, but I don't know too much about it. When you start getting into energy, as Michelle can kind of know, it's like a whole nother multi-layer of there's a lot of complexity to it.
Well,
And,
I can speak specifically to that because we're trying to do it on both the Rogers High
Yes,
School
the
as a
school.
new structure and on Pell Elementary as an already built structure. And I'm hoping to, with Lauren and Dawn, locally come up with, once we figure out how to do it, sort of, here's how to do it. So others will be able to, instead of trying to figure it out, just be
Right.
able to do it. So, but
right.
I just thought that there might be a plan within, because, you know, cutting down trees is not really the answer. Like,
That's
I
not the
don't,
way to go.
it is,
No.
Not
it
the
is
way,
more
not the
expensive
way
to
to go.
do, but I mean, I guess when I drive over to Home Depot, that whole area there, that almost every single house has solar on it in that, it used to be a Navy housing and
Oh,
going
yeah.
back to me.
Yeah.
Right, right. Yes.
They've done it a whole lot of places, so
Well,
just
they
seems like
have,
there
they,
need to
and they
be.
don't have to have the same, they don't have to comply with the same things as a state, because that's all federal property. And they can do, the Navy can go and do what they want to do. But there's more complexity around the programs for the state and how to make it, how to entice people to do it in the right place is really what we need. We need carrots for that. And
I think that's part of what June Speakman's bill does is
yes.
provide some enticements for people
Yes,
to
it does.
provide more of that infrastructure in brown spaces as opposed to tearing down forests.
Louisa, I'll pull up that bill and send it your way. And I'll take a look. And I know I heard you mention, Michelle, that you have a regular call with OER, and Lauren and I have been talking. We have a standing, like a 20-minute meeting one morning a month with a gentleman at OER as well. And I know Lauren was asking about this the other day, but was Chris going to get us some information on that?
I
or-
forgot what that was about. I forgot, slipped my mind, tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Can I ask also, have you heard Rep Potter's bill yet to expand net metering on
yes.
residential?
Yes,
That went to corporations, I think.
yes.
Oh, is that where it went? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that didn't come to environment.
Because you can only put a limited amount of solar on your home relative to
Yeah.
your energy use.
Yeah,
And
I
so
think,
this bill would expand that, so you can put more solar on your house beyond what you actually need, which
Yeah,
is a little bit controversial, but you know, it's a conversation.
Jason has a bill similar to that.
Yes,
Jason
he
and
does.
Brandon, both their bills were heard in Corps last week.
How did that go? Were you there?
I was there, but I was kind of preparing for my own testimony. So I was like only listening with one ear. They both testified, and it seemed, clear. It seemed to make sense, but I'm sure there's some opposition. I think I can't remember what the lobbyist for the power company would said, or if they were there.
Well, I also think some of the environmental advocates and the environmental justice advocates may have issues with it. Because what happens is you sell that power back. So if I generate twice as much on my house than I actually use, National Grid buys that.
has to buy it.
So the
Right.
thought
And
is
then
that
that-
why should all the other National Grid people be paying me?
Right, that is a concern. You're right. That did come up because, and
That's a
that's
concern.
what I've heard from talking to people with like Linda George from the DPUC, because the net metering program, that it produces the most expensive electricity. And so the PUC is always balancing least cost procurement, I think, least cost.
Yeah.
They have to try to balance the environmental needs with getting
Customer cost.
ratepayers, the
Ratepayer
ratepayers,
cost,
the
right,
most
ratepayer.
reasonable amount, cost effective form of electricity.
Louisa, what was your question?
You're talking about environmental justice, and I just want to bring up, like, I called to try to see if I could put solar on my house. And the first question is, are you in a historic district? And it's like, yeah. And I just think that the state government should override some of those things so that you can't have it in nice places. I mean, asphalt is not beautiful. Solar is beautiful and cool, and I just think you can't have those excuses.
I hear you on that. That would be an
And
interesting.
I think, I know a lot of condo rules are, you can't put it on the roof too. There shouldn't be any rules like that allowed, because otherwise we're never going to get to the renewable numbers we need to get to.
I would put that bill in next year and have that discussion. Let's remember that.
Yeah, I was
Start with
denied,
that.
yeah, I was denied to putting solar on my roof in the historic district. I was going to be allowed to put it on the flat section of the historic house because it couldn't be seen, but then it wasn't structurally sound enough. And I wanted to put it on, you know, the peaks, and they said no, because you could see it from the street and it's the historic district.
Right.
So yeah, I ran into that also.
I mean, I just think it's crazy that you can exclude so huge swaths just because of that. I mean, it's just back to, you know, that history above water, you know, I mean, they're all going to sink, you know, I mean, there can be no excuses for not being able to put them on.
There are hundreds of houses in Bristol that can't put solar on their
Yeah,
roofs because
same with
they're in
Newport.
they're
Same
in
with
the
Newport,
district.
same with
Newport.
Newport.
It's ridiculous. So
Are
I
there
think
any
that's-
other questions on any other topic that people want to know about or anything we discussed? There's a lot of information here. We realize that, but like I said, we're sort of like, and we're entering sort of the middle of the legislative session where we move very heavily into hearings and conversations. And then, you know, the last 2 months, May and June, are when we really begin voting on serious bills. So I think I'm finished. Terry, what's on your mind?
I I was thinking the same thing, and regarding timing, I wanted Louisa to know that I just put the June Speakman bill in the chat. If you want to grab that, you could take a look at that solar bill. And yeah, if any of you, I guess, if any of our guests here this evening want to participate in the discussion, you know, you could write to the Environment Committee, but I don't think the Environment Committee is the issue right now, because the Environment Committee, as Lauren said, is very strong. And I think we have probably a majority of people on that committee are
Without a doubt.
want to take action on and have some, you know, good bills come out of that committee this year. So maybe it's writing, you obviously don't need to write to Lauren or myself, so.
Or Susan or Michelle.
Or Susan or Michelle, that's right. So, or Rep. Speakman, you don't have to write to her either, or Rep. Ruggiero.
Or
'cause we're
Ruggiero,
all-
right. Or
we're all
Senator
on the same
Hoyer, we're all on
page.
the same page.
Yes, so maybe you need to write to the Speaker and the Senate President and geared, you know, if you have a specific issue that you are passionate about. I would have a bill, have it connected to a piece of legislation, and I think I would suggest that you write to the Speaker and CC whoever your rep is.
Yes,
Does that make sense, Lauren?
yes, absolutely.
And if you can testify, by all means, go and testify for the bills, because
Or if you want us to keep you posted, drop us an email on issues that are of interest to you.
yes.
There's a
and-
lot of information here on all these bills, but these are the things we're working on.
Yes, and just so people know, there's no more online, there's no more calling and giving telephone testimony. Now it's get in the
All in
car
person.
and schlep up to the State House.
All
and
in person
testify
now.
In person, that's right. So we've moved to all in person starting this week.
So I'm not sure what our next Aquidneck Climate Caucus meeting will be about. We had a few ideas. We're always looking for new ideas. We wanted to remind you to look for Earth Week, because Aquidneck Island Earth Week is a really big deal. I was going to put the link in the chat, but haven't gotten to it. You could just Google Aquidneck Island Earth Week, which is the third week of April, and there's a ton of activities going on. And we'll keep you abreast on our mailing list of different things going on with respects to the island. We know that there's a few interests on the island in pulling together a few in-person meetings on climate. And Terry and I are at in beginning stages of those
Right.
conversations. So
The organizers of Earth Week are people like ourselves, and they're doing a lot of work to get that week, you know, to publicize that week and get all these activities organized. But they too have, Lauren and I have been meeting with them, and they are interested in having some social activities to bring us all together. And then to identify some priorities. And I think they would like to see, and we have suggested like having some kind of an event, more serious, some kind of a workshop or something in person at some point in time to,
Yep.
you know, talk about some of these priorities that you all care about and we care about.
So I guess that's it. We're going to hang up now. I want to thank Susan for joining us. Thanks, Susan, for joining us. Good to
Thank
see
you,
you.
Susan.
And Michelle,